So, have you ever felt just, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information out there? Or maybe you wondered if our current economic models are truly equipped for the kind of rapid shifts we're seeing in the 21st century? Well, today, we're taking a deep dive into a framework that offers a a pretty radical answer, the Gyanpeeth Model Economy. We're pulling insights from Gyanpeeth Economy, Knowledge is Capital for Sustainable Growth by Shiva Narayan Taxila Page. And our mission today is basically to unpack this framework. It proposes a fundamental redefinition, seeing knowledge itself as capital, even as currency. We'll show you how this model aims to tackle some huge global challenges, things like youth unemployment, educational inequality, right head on. Think of this as a kind of lightning-fast download on a genuinely revolutionary economic design. What really struck me, digging into this research, is that it's not just some abstract theory. It actually lays out a practical blueprint, for moving beyond that traditional reliance on industrial production and capital accumulation.
To really unlock the power of innovation, self-directed learning, and, crucially, applied knowledge. Okay, so let's set the stage a bit. Where are we now? Traditional economic systems. They're often really heavily reliant on industrial production, right? Capital accumulation, these rigid, hierarchical labor structures. And the big problem, it seems, is that these models frequently overlook something vital, the dynamic, the generative power of knowledge itself.
Exactly. It's not just overlooked. It's often actively undervalued as a core asset. And in this 21st century knowledge society, the limitations of those old models, they've become glaringly obvious. We see it in technological disruption that, leaves huge chunks of the workforce behind. We see it in persistent socioeconomic stagnation, which, well, it raises a really important question. If the old frameworks are faltering, what's a genuinely viable alternative?
And that's exactly where the Gyanpeeth Model Economy comes in, positioned as this forward-thinking solution. It seems to be rooted in three core interconnected principles: learnography, brainpage theory, and modular knowledge transfer. Kind of technical terms, maybe.
They can sound it, yeah. But the core idea is actually quite intuitive when you break it down. A key difference here is how it explicitly links cutting-edge neuroscience and theories about how we transfer knowledge directly to economic development. That's pretty unique. So the core concept: knowledge functions as both capital and currency. Let's unpack those terms you mentioned. Learnography, that's essentially the science of how we learn most effectively, most efficiently. What actually works for the brain? Then there's brainpage theory. It suggests knowledge is structured, almost like a huge interconnected digital library in our minds. Each brain page is like a unit of applied understanding, something you can actually use. And modular knowledge transfer, that's about breaking down complex stuff into digestible, transferable chunks. Units that can be easily learned, and this is key applied. See, in this model, knowledge isn't just passively acquired, like sitting in a lecture. It's actively engaged through what they call motor cognitive engagement.
Motor cognitive, so like hands-on learning.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. Practical application that literally rewires the brain. And it happens in collaborative learning ecosystems. It makes knowledge this dynamic force for economic growth, not just something sitting in a textbook.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. The research frames the Gyanpeeth model around these 7 foundational pillars. Now, these sound quite different from the roles we usually think about in an economy. Is there one pillar you think is particularly maybe revolutionary, or perhaps one that's most commonly misunderstood?
That's a great question. Because, while some of the names might sound familiar, like entrepreneurs, investors, their function within the Gyanpeeth framework is fundamentally different, reimagined. Each of these 7 plays a vital role in ensuring that, as the research puts it, learning becomes earning and knowledge becomes prosperity. It really is about flipping the script on what drives value in an economy.
Okay, let's dive in then. Let's unpack these pillars one by one, starting with pillar 1, entrepreneurs. In this model, they're seen as the primary drivers: innovation, transformation. They apply creative vision, practical problem solving, launch businesses, services that meet real needs. Pretty standard so far.
Well, yes and no. Think of it this way. In traditional economies, maybe entrepreneurs build factories. In Gyanpeeth, they build knowledge applications. They are fundamentally knowledge applicators. That's the shift. They transform the outputs from research, from education, and specifically from something called Taxila technology, which is the underlying digital framework for managing and applying all this knowledge. They turn that into marketable solutions. They literally harness brain page development, turning learned knowledge modules into actual business modules. And their focus isn't just profit. It emphasizes value creation, sustainability, community upliftment. Often they form what are called economic miniature schools within their own companies.
Miniature schools, so like internal training hubs.
Exactly, but deeply integrated. Small, focused learning hubs constantly applying and refining knowledge within the business itself.
Interesting. Okay, so if entrepreneurs are the architects building these knowledge applications, they obviously need fuel. Which brings us to the next pillar, investors. In any economy, investors provide capital, right? For startups, for growth.
True. But again, in the Gyanpeeth model, investors are envisioned as much more than just financiers. The research calls them mentors of scalability and sustainability. They're not just writing checks. They're strategically supporting value-driven enterprises that actively promote long-term societal benefit. They're often backing ventures really rooted in deep knowledge, applied skills, ethical practices, things like impact investing, traditional venture capital, crowd equity platforms. They're all integrated. But the priority is inclusive growth, not just the financial bottom line.
Okay, pillar 3, technology. We all know technology is crucial today. Efficiency, scalability, modernization, it connects everything.
And here it's described as more than just a tool. It's the nervous system that links all economic agents. That's a powerful image. Think AI, automation, blockchain, biotech. All these innovations enhance every aspect of economic activity, but the model specifically emphasizes tech-enabled brainpage learning environments, digital spaces optimized for that brainpage development we talked about earlier, places where knowledge is rapidly applied, speeding up both the velocity and accuracy of economic functions. Critically, it's about technology amplifying human intelligence, not just replacing it.
Right. Amplifying, not replacing. That's key. Pillar 4, then, the workforce.
Yeah.
The human engine, right? Here, the workforce is skilled in knowledge transfer, collaboration, real-world problem solving.
Yeah, and this is a really radical departure from traditional models where, let's be honest, labor is often seen as just a mechanical input, a cog in the machine. In Gyanpeeth, the workforce is envisioned as this dynamic, adaptive, and skilled network of knowledge workers. They're continuously trained in learnography, that science of learning, to actively develop their own brainpage modules through self-driven learning, teamwork, something called task formatting. And this starts early. It begins in what they call Takshila brainpage schools, where students learn to apply this modular knowledge right from day one.
So if every worker is a knowledge worker constantly developing their brain page, it almost sounds like a perpetual university, but a really practical one.
That's a great way to put it, exactly. And imagine the implications for career changes or adapting to new tech. It becomes less about painful retraining and more about continuous cognitive evolution, adapting your brain pages. Now, with such a skilled workforce producing all this value, who ensures it connects? Who makes the market work? That leads us right to the crucial role of traders.
Okay, traders. Pillar 5. The economic bridge, connecting producers and consumers, ensuring the flow of goods, services, ideas.
Right, but again with a twist. In the Gyanpeeth model, traders are seen as knowledge interpreters. Their job is to translate the value of goods and services effectively, using intelligent marketing, sophisticated analytics, smart logistics. They play a key role in stabilizing the economy, too, by providing critical feedback loops, insights into consumer behavior, price dynamics, demand forecasting. It's a very dynamic, analytical role that requires a strong foundation in communication, economics, and definitely advanced digital literacy.
Got it. Moving on to Pillar 6, research centers. These are the hubs, right? Discovery, development, producing the raw materials of knowledge, as the research puts it.
Exactly. But critically, they're not isolated ivory towers in this model. They're deeply, deeply connected with entrepreneurs and industries. They're linked through something called Gyanpeeth Transfer Channels, or GTCs. Think of GTCs as dedicated, high-speed pipelines for research findings to flow directly from the lab bench to the business plan. It accelerates that whole process of turning academic discovery into market-ready solutions or innovative public policies or new sustainable practices. The emphasis is firmly on applied research, making it useful fast.
Okay, and that brings us to the final pillar, number 7, government policy. This acts as the structural guide, the regulatory force.
Absolutely essential. Effective policy here is paramount. It needs to actively foster innovation, support that systemic education reform we discussed, protect intellectual property, which is critical when knowledge is capital, and champion inclusive development. Policies need to be specifically designed to support brain page learning throughout society, encourage knowledge-based entrepreneurship, fund that vital research, ensure fair trade practices, and governments have a crucial role in providing robust digital infrastructure and and that strong legal framework for intellectual property rights. They basically create the fertile ground for this whole knowledge economy to actually thrive.
Wow, okay, so it's really the integration of all seven that's the key here. The research suggests the true strength of the Gyanpeeth model lies in this systemic integration. They don't just operate in silos. They actively support and reinforce each other, creating what sounds like a truly circular economy, knowledge, skills, capital, innovation, all feeding back into each other. And the result is supposed to be an economy that's not just resilient, but regenerative and genuinely future-ready.
That's the core idea. In sum, the model fundamentally redefines capital. It's structured and applied knowledge, and it positions learning itself as the fundamental labor of societal progress, not just something you do before you get a job. And proponents argue this directly addresses those critical global challenges that traditional models really struggle with, those persistent educational gaps, youth unemployment, the growing digital divide, and unsustainable growth patterns that just deplete our resources.
So we've walked through the blueprint piece by piece, the 7 pillars. But it feels like the real magic, the true story here, isn't in any single pillar, but how they all, well, how they dance together, how they interact to solve the problem. We started talking about information overload, stagnation, inequality. Okay, so what does this all mean for us, for society, for, your future? The research does offer some concrete recommendations, right?
It does. It gets quite practical. Key recommendations include significant education reform, specifically adopting those brainpage learning methods, task formatting, motor practice, modular knowledge construction, getting hands-on. It also means promoting those miniature schools we mentioned, those focused embedded learning hubs. It calls for creating really robust entrepreneurial ecosystems, specifically for knowledge-based startups, supported by incubators, mentorship programs. Policy alignment is obviously critical. National policies need to prioritize digital infrastructure, research funding, educational innovation, always with a sharp focus on equity and lifelong learning. You can't leave people behind. There's also a strong push to strengthen those research industry collaborations, the GTCs, to get academic knowledge into the real world faster, and investing heavily in workforce reskilling, but specifically programs focused on motor learning and brain page development. Learning by doing, essentially. But perhaps one of the most thought-provoking recommendations is about redefining economic success itself, moving beyond just GDP.
Beyond GDP, how? What would we measure instead?
Well, the model proposes new metrics, things like a knowledge productivity index, measuring how effectively knowledge actually turns into economic value, brain page efficiency, gauging how effectively people are learning and applying that knowledge, innovation density, looking at the rate of new ideas and solutions bubbling up, and learning to enterprise conversion rates, tracking how quickly learned skills actually translate into new businesses or ventures. It really raises an interesting question, doesn't it? How would your community, your country, measure up under these kinds of knowledge-centric metrics?
Yeah, that's a completely different way of looking at national wealth. So the Gyanpeeth Model Economy, it's clearly more than just a theory. It's presented as this profound framework for genuinely human-centered development, where prosperity is built directly on people's intelligence, their creativity, their applied knowledge.
Absolutely. And consider the audacious vision behind it, a brain page civilization, where every child becomes a creator, not just a consumer of information. Every school is a launch pad for innovation, every nation a hub of intelligent progress. I mean, what would it truly mean for a nation's wealth to be measured not just by economic output, but by the depth of its learning, the strength of its innovation, the quality of its human development? It's a powerful thought.
It really is. So we encourage you, listening, to reflect on maybe how you could integrate some of these ideas, like brain page learning, into your own life, perhaps structuring your own learning more modularly, actively seeking that hands-on application for new information, and maybe consider how you might advocate for policies that prioritize knowledge equity and innovation in your own communities. The call to action seems clear. Join the Gyanpeeth movement, build the brain page civilization, shape the knowledge economy.